Well, you are back with today with Xu Qinduo and Ben Liang with today's business stories. Here's Zhao Yang.
Well, thank you. Let's check out some of the key events on the corporate front in China this week. Join me on the line now is Jeffrey Towson, Professor of Investment at Peking University Guanghua School of Management. Financial Times actually has released a story that revealed the non-standard lending of many smaller Chinese banks, especially city banks. It showed that the city banks are increasingly active in shadow credit, that they are using various credit structures to issue higher yielding loans. And one fact mentioned in the report is that some city banks have issued non-standard credit totaling over 20% of their assets, while at large, the state-owned banks like ICBC, this number is closer to 1 to 2%. And those are some much smaller banks, so the comparison are not that meaningful in terms of percentage. But what is shocking is that how much these non-standard loans have been increasing in the past 1 or 2 years at these smaller banks. It's basically like finding shadow banking in the normal banking system. So, Jeff Towson, so do you think this is concerning?
I think the rate of increase has gotten people's attention. These are kind of, you can call them shadow credit, you can call them creative credit, but it's basically sort of complicated, non-standard credit, usually for people who couldn't get regular loans, which means there's probably a little bit more problem there. And I think what caught people's attention in this report was the rate of increase. If you look at some of these sort of percentage of their assets, it went from 14% in 2012 to 23, 24% a year later. So it is kind of jumping up quickly, and I think that worries people. And then the second question on top of that would be, what is the quality of this lending? As a general rule, it's not totally fair to say this, but it's generally true. People with good credit and stable, lower situations, they go to the top big banks, ICBC, Bank of China. If you're outside of that system, there's a decent chance it's because you couldn't get a loan there. So this is sort of one step further than that. It's not just going to smaller banks, it's going to smaller banks with their more funny, non-standard stuff. Generally, that means the quality is an issue. Not always, but generally.
And I found the Bank of Tianjin, for example, has 34% of its asset in non-standard credit instruments, with 1/4 in the form of rights to income streams from trust products held via repurchase agreements.
Right. These things, it's always what the rules are, which is, you can only do this type of lending. And then it's these creative structures that are oftentimes designed to get around that. So there's all this sort of non-standard securitization, repurchase agreement, but it's all effectively lending outside of the standard process. And you go bank by bank, people are pretty creative. I don't know what a lot of these are. I can't figure them out.
But how does this sort of shadow lending relate to the real estate sector situation? Prices in real estate here in China have been slowing and in some cases decreasing. So would this type of bank lending be more exposed to risk?
I think when you look at what's going on, yeah, that's a concern. Lending that is maybe a little bit riskier is always, not always, is okay in good times, but in bad times it's where the problem shows up first. One of the banks in this report they looked at, which was a city bank, and they found 2/3 of the non-standard credit was going to property developers, construction companies, some local governments. Those are all the areas that if there's a significant real estate price downturn, 20, 30%, those are the areas that could get in trouble first. And that's especially true in smaller cities. A property bubble in a smaller second-tier city is going to collapse a lot faster than one in, say, Shanghai or Beijing, where there's a lot of demand. So, yeah, those are exactly this might be the problem where real estate could really trip it out, or, start it to happen.
And another story, China's Baogang or Baosteel has made an unsolicited takeover offer for Australian natural resources company Aquila Resources. The over $1 billion offer made in conjunction with Australian company Horizon would let Baosteel move into major unproduced iron ore projects in Australia. So, Professor Towson, why is this offer significant? I mean, Chinese state-owned companies are acquiring natural resources all the time. So what is unique or interesting about this takeover offer for Australian iron ore?
This one, I think, it's interesting to follow as a story for two reasons. I mean, state-owned enterprises like Baosteel, they're buying resources all the time, and $1 billion is not a particularly huge deal. But there were two things in here that really jump out, I think. One is, there's these giants in iron and steel. Obviously, Baosteel's one from China, but you have Rio Tinto and BHP Billiton. The other two, and you see these companies in the paper all the time, there's often a lot of politics involved with them because they're so large. Rio and BHP have largely controlled iron ore coming out of Australia thus far. They've pretty much, Chinese companies haven't been able to get in there in a major way. So this is really Baosteel sort of going against that and trying to break in. And that's got some cool nationalistic stuff all over it. So it's a fun story. The second more serious, well, not more serious, I guess, is this is an undeveloped, if they go into this in this iron ore, it will be an undeveloped iron project, which means, you start from scratch, you build, you dig, you produce years later. The last time a Chinese company did that in Australia, it became a bit of a famous story. This was CITIC Pacific, which went into an undeveloped iron ore project in Australia, and it almost became the famous story for a problematic investment, where it went on for years, the cost ballooned to $10 billion, and the ore has just finally started coming out in the last year. I mean, it's a really famous story of, oh my God, this went bad. So this is sort of a reattempt at the same thing, and that makes it interesting.
But this is an unsolicited offer. Is that unusual?
This one is pretty interesting for a couple of reasons. From the reports, it appears that, Baosteel basically contacted the company on Saturday. They asked to meet with the chairman. The chairman, for some reason, did or didn't meet, and then they sent a letter to the shareholders on Monday. That's a pretty direct approach, but Baosteel already owns, I believe, about 15% of Aquila, and the chairman owns 30%. So these folks already know each other well. So it's not like this, they don't know each other and haven't been sitting at the board table for a long time. So something interesting is going on with their approach. But it looks like, from the initial reports, they're going straight to the shareholders directly.
And final story, internal sources are suggesting a draft plan for establishing a new nationwide social credit system has been submitted here to the State Council for review. As part of the plan, an information platform will be set up to process personal and industrial credit information. The platform will also deal with commercial registrations as well as tax and pension information. So is this for credit scores and similar to the U.S. or the Western one, or more for other factors like judicial credibility and tax payment?
Right. I mean, at first glance, it sounds like a credit score. Okay, everyone's going to have their credit history, and you're going to get a score like in the U.S. and other countries. But the list of the 4 topics are administrative, commercial, social, and judicial. So then they mention things like traffic violations, tax payments, and then it's going to be not just individuals but companies. So it seems like it's going to be something much bigger than that. And it's going to have social as well as judicial as well as credit information somehow bundled in. But we don't know what it's going to be. I mean, this is just the first announcement, but it looks significant. It looks like it's the real thing, maybe.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey Towson, Professor of Investment at Peking University Guanghua School of Management.
Thank you.